Hello, and welcome to the Law School Playbook. Today's topic is law school memorization, also known as how do I memorize all of those rules? We know that there are a lot of rules in law school, so I recommend you start early. There are many rules for each course, so don't try to remember too much at once. Instead, try to test yourself in short blocks on a regular basis throughout the semester. The key is cramming at the end does not work. You want to schedule this throughout the course of the semester so that you're able to put the material in your long-term memory for use on the final exam. So we talk a lot in academic success about the testing effect or retrieval practice. And if you're studying for the bar, this may be something you're familiar with as well. It is a learning strategy that's focused on getting information out. So forcing yourself to remember it and put it out. So you're calling the information to mind, strengthens your memory for that information. And the forgetting curve, as we call it, is less likely to occur. So there are many ways to do this, including practice exams. Let's go over the different types of techniques you might use to engage in the testing effect. So we talked about essay exams. There are multiple choice questions that you can practice on. Writing your outlines from memory. We've talked about the scientific evidence to support handwriting in terms of long-term retention. Making flashcards, posters, mind maps. Using technology like spaced repetition, which uses electronic flashcards, and Quizlet is another one that uses electronic flashcards to help you to memorize. The good thing about the testing effect is it focuses on the output. So even if you get something incorrect, so you use a flashcard and you get the wrong answer, as long as you go back and do what I call the back end work, going over that flashcard correct answer, correcting your practice exam if you got the answer wrong, you still retain the benefit of memorizing that, even if you got the information wrong at the outset. So let's take a closer look at some of the things we mentioned. We're going to start with acronyms or mnemonic devices. Maybe you use these in undergrad. I urge you to think back to math. I try not to think back to math, but maybe you use this acronym, PEMDAS, to remember the order of operations, or perhaps you use a mnemonic device. So for every word you're trying to memorize, you take the first letter and turn it into a sentence. Here, the mnemonic device for the order of operations is "Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally." And that would remind you when taking an exam that what you're trying to remember is parentheses, the P, exponents, E, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. So you see how you could use either an acronym or a mnemonic device to memorize the order of operations in math. So I have this little warning label here because sometimes professors prefer rule statements that are slightly different than the ones I'm going to use here. So you may find a difference in an element of the example that I'm giving, for example. So don't use this for the substance. So just use it to recognize the skill. Don't go to your doctrinal professor and say, Professor Harris said that it's continuous is defined as X, right? Instead, listen to what your doctrinal professor has to say, but recognize that these are strategies for memorizing that information. So here, adverse possession. A lot of students I know in first year, at least at my law school, use the acronym HCNUs. And using each first letter, HCNUs stands for each of the elements of adverse possession that is required. So the possession must be hostile and adverse. That's your H. For your C, it must be continuous. For A, it must be actual. For NO, it must be notorious and open. For E, it must be exclusive. And finally, for S, it must be for the statutory period of time. So that's how you might use an acronym there. Another example would be torts. If you're trying to memorize the elements in a battery, you could use the acronym AIC, which would stand for act, intent to cause a contact, and C, cause a harmful or offensive contact, right? So AIC would help you memorize the tort of battery. Moving on to something a little more complex, constitutional law. Let's say you're working to remind yourself or remember what is in the contracts clause. You might use a mnemonic device that would create a sentence like this: radical news reporters sip Pepsi. And I find that the more silly or memorable the sentence is, the better ingrained it is in your memory. So here the R, radical, would stand for retroactive. News reporters would be not remedial. SIP would be substantial impairment of the terms. Pepsi would be not regulating police powers. So you see, there's not an exact science to this, but hopefully this is ringing a bell with respect to this strategy that you may have used in other contexts, which may work well for you in law school memorization. So let's take a closer look at flashcards. So you can create your own. Law school has quite the market. Almost everything is available for purchase. You can purchase flashcards, you can purchase physical flashcards or electronic flashcards. But the old school method works too. So if you use, just get some note cards and handwrite the information yourself, that helps you to synthesize into your own words without changing the rule. That's a very important skill. So finding those key words, keeping those in your definition, and transcribing them onto a flashcard. And you try, if available, to use your professor's rule statements. So where do you get those? How do I figure out what the rule actually is to put on the flashcard? Certainly in class. Pay attention in class and you will get that down. But PowerPoints are often posted. Those will have rule statements. If your institution or professor uses spaced repetition technology, your professor may provide rule statements to you there. They also appear in model answers or grading rubrics. So those are ingredients that you could use to create your own flashcards. Use them actively. So don't just sort of look at them and say, yeah, I get that. I'm sure I would have said that right. Really quiz yourself. Either write down the answer, say it aloud. Because if you are just sort of passively looking through flashcards, whether they are handwritten or on technology using spaced repetition, you can run the risk of just familiarizing yourself with the material, but not truly knowing it in a way you can recall it. So use the materials, use the flashcards very actively to test yourself. And you can also use those flashcards to move them around, set them up on a big table to recreate your outline to sort of see how the rules fit together to make the big picture. Let's just take a closer look at handwriting for a moment. So I know in this day and age of technology, handwriting is not everybody's favorite, but there are benefits, proven benefits. Handwriting slows you down. It makes you think. In that way, it deepens your understanding. And because we are not robots and you can't possibly take down every word, handwriting forces you to select the words that you're writing down. And in that way, you are processing the information in a way you may not if you're just sort of taking notes or typing things out kind of without paying much attention. So it helps you retain information and uses your muscle memory, the writing and thinking. So you can use handwriting for memorization through your notes, your reading notes and class notes, transcribing them, or in real time using handwriting for those. Creating flashcards, as we've discussed, using the whiteboard. I have lots of suggestions for using the whiteboard on my website, but that's a place where you could write out sample answers, you can write out rules. You can write out attack outlines or create posters or mind maps, all, just by hand, and doing so will help you memorize. Here's the thing. There is such a thing called a desirable difficulty. This is hard. It's supposed to be hard. If it wasn't hard, everyone would do it, right? So you have to embrace the difficulty that there are a lot of rules to memorize, that there will be challenging topics, and you have to push through them. And that doesn't mean sort of glazing over and saying, well, I understand trespass, but I don't understand adverse possession. I really hope trespass is on the exam. Use your tools, seek clarification and feedback, and know that understanding is key, and that will really aid your memorization. And then when you're feeling kind of stuck with memorizing or working on materials, try and mix it up. As my husband, says when referencing his childhood Etch-a-Sketch, he always says, if it's not working, pick it up and shake it. And you have to do the same with your study location. Changing your study location sounds simple, but it's shown to increase retention and reduces the forgetting curve. So those are my ideas for law school memorization. As always, I truly believe that you can do this. I'm here to support you. So do your best, and I'll be rooting for you. Thanks.